Manx Gaelic and the State, Opportunities and Challenges was the title of a talk delivered last week by Dr Christopher Lewin from the University of Edinburgh. As this is Blein na Gaelgey, Year of the Manx Language, it seems a timely opportunity to take stock of the Isle of Man's achievements in reviving our native language over the past 4 decades. I caught up with Dr Lewin last week to find out more.
Well, I'm from the island, born and brought up. I was among the first few years that did Manx in school, and since then I've followed a career in revolving around the Celtic languages and the Manx in particular, so it's something that's close to my heart. And while I spend most of my time away, currently I'm at the University of Edinburgh, so spend most of my time in Scotland. Obviously the fate of the Manx language is something that's close to my heart, so I hope I can make some contribution to discussions around its future.
And your talk described what's happened in recent decades. Why is I suppose really from about the 1970s, but particularly from the 1990s onwards, why has this been such a fundamental change for the Manx language?
Well, I think it's part of an international trend. After the Second World War and in the second half of the 20th century, there was a growing awareness of the value of minority cultures and minorities of all kinds, of course. So language revitalization in the Celtic countries and further afield has been part of that, and I think the Isle of Man was part of that ecosystem. It's also there was the growth of the welfare state and so on, a bit more prosperity during those decades when people had a bit more space to think about cultural issues and so on, and fight for them, and of course the growing autonomy of the Isle of Man and the awareness of the importance of national identity. And I think all those things came together around that time to move, as we moved away from a sort of apathy, if not hostility, to the language, to a little bit more support, and that's grown over the last 40 years, especially since the 1980s.
And why should we bother with the Manx language? I mean, I know, as someone who's spent most of their lives trying to revive the language, but for people who might say, well, actually, we're in less financially prosperous times now. What we need is things that will get us out of the financial problems that we're in, not be a continuous drain on the financial situation. And that's how they would describe Manx. They would say, well, look, you just throw money at it and you don't get any benefit from it. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think we do get a benefit from it, even in purely economic terms. There's a lot of culture, music, and festivals, and tourism revenue, and so on. I mean, more research is needed on this, but I do suspect you would find that it's a net benefit, even in purely financial terms. And I think if we're looking to the future, where we want the island to be a prosperous and attractive place, yes, obviously we have to invest in the fundamentals of the health service and education and so on. We can't have we're not going to have an island with a very well-funded health service and then nothing going into culture and heritage and the things that make the island distinctive. I think they always have to go together. And there's also a general well-being sense. These things improve people's quality of life, improve people's mental health, and in the long run make the island a healthier and happier place.
And for you, what was it that motivated you to learn the language and to get to the stage now where you are one of the world's leading experts on how the language is constructed and used?
I think really it was a general interest in language in general. I once I figured out how grammar works and how you can put sentences together and say something that you want to say rather than just repeating phrases, it suddenly became more interesting to me than it maybe had been in the first few months of learning. And then I found a couple of books and basically taught myself mostly, and then realised there were other related languages that I could study, and it grew from there, really.
And is it a head thing or a heart thing for most people that learn Manx, would you say? Would you say that they are motivated primarily because of a warm feeling inside, rather than if I learn Manx or if I become bilingual, I will have significant economic benefits over my peers?
I mean, yeah, I think it's generally a heart thing. I think, as I say, there are benefits, but I don't think you can really go into it thinking I'm going to get this out of it and that out of it. I mean, there may be situations where people are in a teaching role or something where they could do with learning Manx, and that's a motivation, or maybe they're, friends with or in a relationship with someone that speaks Manx, and then that's a motivation. So there are many different motivations, but I think primarily it has to be something you get passionate about, really.
And of course, the charge in past decades, probably if you go back to the 60s, 50s, 40s, the general view was you wouldn't earn anything from Manx. Manx was the language of poverty, was the general feeling, and that's partly due to the fact that the language was dying out, or had pretty much died out as a community language by then.
Yes, that's right, and it's a very different situation now, where you can people follow careers revolving around the language, especially in teaching roles. And one of the points I was making in my talk was we really need to expand the capacity in these roles, especially in teaching, so that we can grow the community and have more Manx speakers in the future, and more people that can take on these roles as well.
Because what you described was a fairly stark position, whereby in the peripatetic Manx team, that's the team that goes around all the schools teaching children a bit of Manx, that whilst that's reasonably well supplied with teachers, when it comes to adult learning, that there's only one person paid full-time who is engaged in teaching, although she doesn't just do teaching, and then a few other part-timers. But bearing in mind there's an awful lot more adults on the island than there are children, you might have thought that there would be more adult teachers by now.
Yes, I mean, looking at this partly from the outside as a kind of expert, if you like, that has some experience of other minority languages, I think if I was looking at this dispassionately, that would be one of the areas that really stands out as needing more investment, needing more growth. And that's not the fault of the organisation that's primarily responsible for that area, which is Culture Vannin, who do extremely good work, and they're working flat out this year on the Year of the Manx Language, along with other organisations. But I think it's just all of these things are structural issues. They're the outcome of how things have developed organically, and maybe without too much planning, or the individual things might have been planned, but the bigger picture of how much capacity we have here and what needs to grow there is maybe something we're only starting to look at a bit more now. So that, I believe there has been some growth in classes for adults recently, but I think that's definitely an area that needs to expand, because however much success there's been in the Bunscoil and the children that go on to secondary immersion in Queen Elizabeth II High School and people learning in the other schools, the reality is that a lot of those people leave the island when they're 18 and don't come back. And not all of them, of course, will, even if they are here, will want to be involved in Manx or be teachers at least, and so on. So I think the adult learners, and especially younger adults, working age adults, acquiring Manx and taking on these roles. This is going to remain important, and engaging those people and giving them opportunities and giving them potentially, time off work and so on to learn Manx intensely, as you can do in other languages. These are the sort of things that need to be looked at and ideally need to be invested in.
One of the things that the century we now live in has delivered is a much more professional, as in paid for, I'm using the term professional and amateur very carefully, professional as in employed people, a professional service for the language rather than the amateur service that used to take place. So effectively everything pretty much that was delivered for most of the 20th century was delivered by volunteers and enthusiasts. Is that something which is unique to the Isle of Man, or is this just a general thing that's happened elsewhere as well, that the voluntary sector has become less and less important as the language starts to develop?
Well, I wouldn't say it's become less important. It's just the other side has grown more, and the whole thing has grown more. So maybe proportionately, it's not as significant as a sort of proportion of the overall workforce that are involved in the language, if you like. And I think that is a pattern. When other minority languages started off with minimal support from official channels and relying really on volunteers. And yeah, that's a general pattern that we see, a move towards professionalisation, which is generally a good thing. It increases what you can do and what you can achieve. But there's still a role for volunteers and for people that are just passionate and enthusiastic, and you hope that if you grow capacity, if you grow the numbers of people that speak Manx and are engaged in Manx, then that inspires some people to set up a conversation group that once a week or whatever, or something that they feel they can do as well. And the two things have to work in tandem. And I'd also say on that the crucial role for, if you like, the grassroots or the wider community is really raising their voices in support of the language, and especially when we're looking at an election year, making politicians aware that this is something people care about beyond just the language bodies themselves, and demand that more is done to support the language during the next Tynwald.
And of course, this is part of your thinking for delivering the talk this year, and delivering the talk as close as you have to the election. It's a time where politicians, current politicians and wannabe politicians, will all be starting to think about what they want to put in their manifesto. And this is possibly one of the reasons why you're delivering the talk at this time.
Well, that's part of the thinking, certainly. I've done some research on these areas in the last few years, so I wanted to, while it's Year of the Manx Language, I wanted to present some of my thoughts and anyway. But yeah, I think it's important to have these conversations around a time when we're looking at an election. And I think it's also important to remember that these are part of wider issues, like probably the biggest issue for the language is retaining younger people, especially, and then that brings us into all the questions about housing and cost of living and job opportunities and so on, which are ultimately the deciding factors in whether people live and stay and thrive here, or whether they go elsewhere and take their language skills or interests with them.
We have around about, I think it was 2,500 speakers or people who claim to speak more than a few words or phrases in Manx. That number hopefully will have increased by now. Maybe we're getting close to 3,000 speakers. You would imagine that those people will be the sorts of people who will say to anyone knocking on their doors, the doors in the run-up to the election, actually, you know what? we would like to see more support for the Manx language, or and perhaps you'll be able to tell us as we go through the rest of this interview what sorts of things you think they should be asking for. But 3,000 out of a population of 86,000 isn't that many. I mean, are there other natural supporters of Manx, would you say, that perhaps haven't got the more than the few words or phrases?
Well, I think there are plenty of supporters out there. I mean, I can't remember when the last surveys were done, but public opinion tends to be quite supportive. There's a lot more supporters out there than actual speakers, and I think we definitely need to harness that and motivate those people to make this an issue, really.
And I suppose the main big change happened after a Gallup survey. I think was it in 1989 or 1990, and that Gallup survey said a third of the population wanted their children to learn some Manx in schools, and that was the big step, the big change. It's quite possible now that we might have more than a third of the population supportive of the language.
Well, I would certainly hope so. I mean, I think that's certainly the trend. I mean, there's always going to be a few people that are not interested or even hostile, but I think the majority of people see that it's culture in general and heritage are important, and the language is part of that.
One of the things in your talk that you mentioned was something like £500,000 has been spent in studying the language in higher education, the field that you're in. £500,000 is a lot of money, and none of that, or hardly any of that, has come from the Isle of Man?
Yes, that's right. This was highlighted actually by a couple of people in the audience last night as well, that the reality is the Isle of Man doesn't have a higher education and research sector, and that's a wider conversation. I think that's quite a hindrance to many areas of our economy and society, to be perfectly honest. And I'm told that that's very much still on the back burner in terms of setting up some kind of higher education institution over here beyond what we have at the UCM. But that's the reality, unfortunately, that if you want to research a topic related to Manx or anything to do with the Isle of Man, you've got to make a case to a funder in the UK, paid for by the UK taxpayer ultimately, or Ireland. I was in Ireland for a couple of years, and currently I'm funded actually by the EU for 2 years, in a scheme that the UK is signed up for post Brexit. So it is possible to get that funding, but you've always got to maybe jump through additional hurdles to make it seem relevant to people that maybe don't even know what the Isle of Man is or what Manx is. So I think it would be nice to see a bit more support from the local authorities here, or whatever bodies might be relevant, because we need more research on Manx. I'm not just talking for myself, but there are other people out there, talented people out there that have things to contribute, that would be willing to do crucial research about the revitalisation of the language and what sort of how successful different things have been and what might happen in the future, and other things like resources for the language itself in terms of dictionaries, for example. We haven't had a new dictionary of Manx for decades now, and there's a lot of changes in the world and in the language since then that people don't have that much guidance for, and really it's not unclear where we would get the resources from to do some of those things, really.
One of the other things that you highlighted in your talk was that there is no single body which is responsible for the promotion and development of the Manx language. We have two government agencies, or one government agency, one Tynwald agency, which is kind of a government agency. You've got the Department of Education, which obviously teaches children and has the ability to teach adults at the it's not the colleges, it's the UCM, University College Man. You've got Culture that has some level of responsibility. It seems to have shifted a little from when certainly I was in the role as an Granada, which was primarily about developing the Manx language. Now it seems to be much more to do with adult learners than language development. But there is no single funding body for the language. There's no single body that people can go to and say, actually, we think that the future direction of the Manx language needs this, that, or the other, and here's a funding application. Is that a significant problem, would you say?
Well, it's something that can be worked around, but I do think ideally we would want to look at reformulating the institutions we have to support the language, and a specific body, maybe on the kind of model of Culture Vannin, but of a similar size, maybe in staffing, but specifically looking at the language, and then let Culture Vannin concentrate more on some of the other areas of its remit. That might be something worth looking at. Whether that would be easy to achieve in our current financial climate and so on is, of course, a different question. But I think realistically, these structures, however much they've achieved, and they've achieved fantastic things, have been in place more or less as they are. Well, the last big step forward is the founding of the Bunskal, and that's 20 years ago now. So, I think there is time to take stock and look at, is this really the patchwork of organisations and structures that are up to the task, or do we need to look at, I would say, a Manx Language agency backed up by legislation with a specific, fairly detailed remit and responsibilities set out in statute in potentially a Manx Language Act. I think potentially that's what...
And of course that was something as well that you highlighted in your talk, that in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, that those our three closest Celtic neighbours, they all have language acts. We haven't gone down that route to date.
Yes, and that's in a comparative, looking for it again with a scholarly lens. That is one of the things that stands out as a little bit different or anomalous in the Isle of Man's case. And you might say, well, we've achieved the things we've achieved in a different route, and maybe a little bit more organic, informal route, without creating, a specific statutory framework, and that's fair enough. But I do think we're at a stage where we at least need to ask the question, is that good enough, or do we want to put things on a firmer footing, a clearer footing, legislatively? And that might be something for the new members of Tynwald in the autumn to start thinking about.
And the sorts of things that would be in that act?
Well, I would say clarifying the official status of Manx, when and where you can use it in interactions with the state, and clarifying what should be in bilingual signage and so on and so forth. Currently, that's not set out in any kind of legislation at all.
There is a Tynwald policy on signage.
Yes, there are policies, but there's nothing that's legally binding per se. And then potentially setting up a Manx Language agency, or at the very least setting out more detailed statutory responsibilities for the existing institutions, potentially looking at a statutory Manx Language national language strategy. That's something Scotland has introduced in its new Language Act last year. And of course, we do have a language strategy, but it's coming from the organisations themselves. It doesn't have maybe the force that a statutory strategy would have. and potentially looking at setting up an agency. Well, education is the other big thing. I think this might be more appropriately I believe there's an upcoming education bill. There might be an opportunity to look at strengthening the position of Manx in the curriculum a bit.
Final question then. If someone comes knocking on the listener's door at election time, what are the things that you would hope that they would, if they're supportive of Manx anyway, what would you hope that they would ask their prospective MHKs?
Are you willing to invest more or fight for investing more in the language? And do you accept that while many things have been achieved, there are still gaps, there is further road to go, and are you prepared to fight for that? And I think the first thing that could happen would be a sort of review, maybe a new select committee review, or commissioning a report that would assess everything in more detail and maybe come to a more detailed view with more evidence as to what's working, what needs further development, and how things could be reformed, and then potentially look to introducing new structures, or potentially a language act further down the line. That's how I would see that things should progress.
Goramai Morad son Lotrun.
Goramai.
That was Dr Christopher Lewin from the University of Edinburgh. So what do you think? Is it time for the Manx language community to get greater, more structured support? Or do you think it's okay for our language and its culture to wither away into obscurity? I'm Phil Gaughan, Goramai son Gaelgey. Thanks for listening.